Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. It is 6:15. I just parked at Trinity Presbyterian Church and I am going to a presentation by Sarah Sue Harbinger, who co-authored a book with, I believe her name is Laura Alexander. The book is about all the signers of the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence. So you know I'm super excited about this. I have run into both of these women several times over the past couple weeks. I first met Sarah Sue Harbinger in the Hopewell Presbyterian Church Cemetery the very first time I went there to film. I ran into Laura Alexander at the Elmwood Pinewood Cemetery, and then they were both present this past Saturday at Hopewell for all the celebrations. I've been really wanting to get the book, but it was cash only or Venmo, and I never carry cash and I don't have Venmo. So I had to go pull cash today, and I'm excited because Sarah Sue is going to do a presentation tonight and talk about it. I'm here to buy the book, get both of them to sign it for me. I don't know if I'm going to be able to film this presentation or not. I'm going ahead and shooting an intro anyway, but if I can't, I will definitely talk to you about it another time and tell you how it went. And I'm very excited to have my own copy of this book. So here we go. Let's go check this out.
Thank you for coming, and if you're in the sunshine, get out of it. You're not to blind yourself back there. As Matt said, I've been a part of this for a very long time. I've been some part of Mecklenburg history since the turn of the century. Isn't that odd? I can say that now, turn of the century. But I've been a reenactor at least that long, and I've been part of the MecDec Society in one way or the other for at least that long. And there's a lot of familiar faces here. I'm glad you recognized all the descendants. Had he not done it, I would have done it. There are a few descendants in here that are really special. If you in some way contributed to this book, I'd like you to stand up, please. Tripp's already standing, so I know he's there. Laura, you need to stand up because you're a descendant as well as an author. Is there anybody else here that was actually giving us information? Well, thank the two of you for sure, because, oh, there's another, because she's standing in for the Reese family. There's part of the Reese family. We have a lot of people that have helped us. Thank you very much. It's been a single effort on the part of the two of us, but we have worked for a year and a half, and we have managed to hit this week, which is kind of a minor miracle. Like the man in Sing Spirit of Love said, I don't know how it works, it's just a mystery. But we got here. How many of you have been in Mecklenburg County for less than a year? Okay, welcome. How many of you have had families that have been here for almost 300 years? Yeah, I know. When I got here 35 years ago, I started to meet people in North Mecklenburg County who had families that had been here for 300 years. And I went, I didn't know anybody was in this part of the country 300 years ago. But they were very quiet about it, but they were here, and they started introducing me to people, And so pretty soon, I was part of the in crowd in North Mecklenburg County. You know, I say that because I don't live in Charlotte, I live in North Mecklenburg County. So I got really into this anyway. How many of you have been here, like me, like around 35 years? You came here for something, yeah, there's a bunch of us. I think there was sort of the break-up time of a lot of companies and a lot of, get out of the cold weather time, and a lot of those things happened for you too. How many of you have been to a reenactment? Oh, thank you. It was a lot of work to put those things on and get all those clothes on and go out there and do that. Let me bring you up to speed on the book. All of you here tonight, one way or the other, whether you've been here forever or been here for 5 minutes, tonight you're part of Mecklenburg County. You get to celebrate the fact that Mecklenburg County was the original place to declare independence in this country. It's on our flag, it's on our license plates, and it's all over that book. So welcome and huzzah to the Mecklenburgers. think, okay, it's been 70 years since anybody wrote a book about the signers. This is the last book that was written about the signers. You may not recognize this particular edition. This is Victor King's book. It's darn hard to find. I couldn't find it in the library. I couldn't get it any place. I get it online, but I wanted to actually have it in my hand. I had to send to India. This book was actually printed in India. Why it's printed in India? I have no explanation. But it's beautiful. And it's word for word Dr. King, Victor King's book. And if you've ever looked up anything about the signers on the library system or CNN Story, they pretty much quote this book. This is their favorite book to quote about the signers. But it was written in 1956. So, is anything that was written in 1956 still valid today? I'm not sure. I knew that we had some resources that Victor King didn't have. We had something called the internet. And all the digitization that had happened on the internet. So we thought, well, we can probably add a little something. There was this wonderful thing called Ancestry. We could go call it out then, which was kind of interesting. So we thought we had something to add to what he'd done that many years ago. But the other friends that we used, not just Victor, but some other good friends that you know. I'm sure you recognize pretty much all of these guys, right? How many of you have not read that book? Go get this book. That's David Fleming's Who's Your Founding Father. It was written 2 years ago. First of all, it's a delightful read. It's an excellent survey of whether or not the Mecklenburg is real or not, and has some very nice background information. If you didn't read that one, did you read this one? Okay, very good. That's Scott Cypress. That's a few years older. Written by a lawyer, so he has a different slant than a guy who's really basically a sports writer. It's a little different. Those are the two that I think everyone around here knows now. But the one everybody used to know is this one. This is J.B. Alexander's book. Turn of the century, 1906, if I remember right. Descendant of the Alexanders. It has all sorts of history about Mecklenburg County. And the last little 20 pages or so are sketches of each one of the signers in that deck. Almost everybody else that wrote a book about the signers quoted this book. Right or wrong, they quoted this one. There's a lot wrong in this book. Good try for 1900, but there's a lot wrong in this book. So, it's still a good resource, but those were our basic starting points. And then there's this. Thank goodness for Hopewell Church Library. I think every church around here has some sort of library, but Hopewell is particularly a good mine, you know, playing in. This is written by a guy named Ray Worth. Not, you know, I wouldn't ask you to look at it. I wouldn't ask anybody but me to read that. But what he saved me was 20 trips downtown. Because what this book is him going down and quoting deeds, wills, marriage records, baptism records, every kind of record he could find out of the treasure troves at the time that he wrote this. And that meant I didn't have to go down there and get it. But this is from 1946, so it's not exactly a youngster either. It's as old as my brother. But it saves me an awful lot of distance. This has got information that you can hardly argue with because it's from the public records. Now, based upon those books, those are the ones that you see up there, based upon those books, we started doing biographies of each of the signers. What we had was a lot of good stuff on the controversy. That's David Fleming and Scott Cypress work. We didn't have, though, out of all that, very much on the role of Craighead, which you'll hear about more. The strange and unusual motivations of the people in the South versus the people in the North. Much detail about some of the signers' lives. Some of the whole sketch was about 4 sentences long on some of these signers. We've lost the family stories. There's a few of those in J.B. Alexander, but most of them have been evaporated over the years because when you got into the 20th century, historians like to be factually oriented. They want to tell you a story unless they can prove it 3 times with some sort of documentation. So the stories just got erased. And the other thing that nobody had done, of course, was make the photographs in color. So we could do that. So we went forward, and to fill in all those blanks, we have all these other books. I did not bring all those today. That is a pile of books. But I did bring one to show you. Because, two actually, we got from the Reese family copies of their own family histories, which were published beyond their family. We got those from Laura's Ford family. I found a couple in Hopewell Church. Finding these originals of family stories were valuable beyond belief. Somewhat wrong sometimes. As Henry Louis Gates always says, family stories that get passed down get a little twisted sometimes. But treasure troves were something that was interesting and enlivening. So thank you very much, families. And then this book, which I had on my shelf for a long time, read a long time ago, it's called Charlotte and the American Revolution. And you might not think that that was going to be a treasure trove about science or something like that, but he had gone through a great analysis of what their military history was and what their affiliation with the churches were. 2 big pieces of their lives. So, strange little book that had great stuff in it. Besides those, we have all the rest of these things. We have all the church histories. Church history, church history, church history, church history, church history. All of those pretty much stopped in the 1950s. One went as far as the 1970s, but that's as near as they got. This wonderful little book, we have a contact card in our website. You can send us a note. Lady sent us a note and said, I have a copy of this book, would you like to have it? I went and got that book. What that book is it's the history that was written for the bicentennial 50 years ago. Before they really erased all the family stories. And some of the other things, as you think about the difference in time, that's a long time ago. That's 50 years ago. That's 2 whole generations, maybe a little bit longer than that, depending on how you count it. So they were talking to people who had talked to people who knew the people. Okay? We're too far away to do that now. But they still had a few people who had had the family. They were talking to people who had been told by the people who were there what was going on. So, valuable thing. One thing I found out for sure about them was where some of the houses were down in downtown Charlotte. Because it gave exact locations of some of those places, which were hard to find. So I shared those with the guys over at the Charlotte Museum of History. And when they put their diorama together, they used that as a resource too. We did this as a community effort. This funny little book is from my home port, Kansas City. That is the story of the Pony Express written by the man who started the Pony Express. And you've heard about the express rider coming in? I wanted to know what an express rider really was. So I went to the guy who I figured knew the most about it, the guy who started the Pony Express, and found out what that really was. So sometimes you get a little outside the circle of where you think you might be to get some information. These 2, this one and that one I mentioned, are almost direct quotes from J.B. Alexander. This was an odd little book that came across my desk about the close of the work we were doing on this. It certainly isn't about the backpack, it's about North Carolina. But it brought up an interesting quandary in my mind. He asked the question, is it the leaders who were leading the people to revolution, or was it the common people who were pushing the leaders that direction? I don't know. I still don't know for sure. I have an opinion now. You can't talk to me very long about getting an opinion. But I thought that was an interesting thing to think about. So as you go through the book, you'll see some of that occur, where it seems like it's a leader calling people someplace, or whether it's the people pushing them in other places. As you go through the next year, leading up to the anniversary of the whole country, think about that. Which way did that go? Who were those people in Philadelphia anyway? Anyway, that brought another aspect of the whole thing, is the ideological aspect of that. And all this put together, and we found out there's some things that were missing. Finding obscure and unmarked graves was very strange to do. There's one man who's claimed by 3 different churches. The other one's claimed by 2. So, we're sure. And I'm going to get Laura to come up here in a second and tell you the story about the snake. And we always ask every descendant that we talk to if we could please have any picture of any kind, of any artifact they have from signers. A portrait, a picture of the house, a picture of the farm, their watch, a book they had, anything at all related to those signers. And you know how many we got? Let me guess. Right, 0. 0. I'm worried about that, and I thought, well, why do we have 1,000 pictures of George Washington and absolutely nothing from these people? Why do we have an entire house from John Jefferson and have nothing with these people? Why are these people not holding on to their own family stories, even the little tiny bits? And then I thought about who I was related to in 1775 and what artifacts I have of that person, and I understood. Because I have nothing of them yet, except their name. Harbinger is still the name, but that's all I have left is their name. So I guess that wasn't too confusing, but it was disappointing, because I thought surely I'd find something somewhere that had to do with at least 1 or 2 of these people, but nothing. Laura, come up here and tell me about your snake.
Thanks so much. It's great to be with y'all tonight, and I'm going to be talking about several things this evening, but I have done a lot of family, genealogy kind of research, some historical research, especially after working on this book, but that's mostly in libraries, on the internet, perhaps I have been to some cemeteries, but they're usually the kind that are nicely groomed and somebody's keeping them up. And so has anybody ever been to the Rocky Spring Burial Ground that's outside of Mid-Hill? And
she's been to every single one of them. That's the plant over there.
Well, we found out this was one of the very last things that happened before we pulled the plug on the publication, and that was to find a grave marker for John Ford. Who are my Ford cousins who are here? Yes. So I'm descended from John Ford on my mother's side of the family. And I'll never forget the way Sarah Sue said it. She said, well, this cemetery, all we have is an address of the person's house that's across the road from where you turn to go down into the cemetery. And that already seemed kind of ominous. But then she said, and it's your ancestor we're trying to find. So you go and go in that cemetery. And then when I got there, I realized why. It's very overgrown. There's all this grass and tall, foliage. And all of a sudden, when I first stepped into the graveyard, it's not really very well designated from the other stuff surrounding it even. I could swear I saw a snake scuttling through the grass. And I was like, this is not the kind of family ancestry stuff I'm used to doing. But as my ancestors would have, I forged ahead. And I looked at every marker in the graveyard. Unfortunately, none of them were legible enough to read, except for Adam Alexander. This is also the burial ground for him, one of the signers, but his grave marker can be read, and the DAR has placed a plaque on it as well. So that one was clear. The others, I never found one, but when we looked at the sign at the entrance, people have memorialized that Adam Alexander, John Ford, and John Query are the 3 neck signers that are buried in the cemetery. So I also, in addition to going through this little new exercise for me, out something new about my ancestor, because I had always been told that he was buried in the cemetery next to the Philadelphia Presbyterian Church. Well, what the deal is, of course, is that when it was Clear Creek Presbyterian in the very beginning, it was this 2.5 miles outside of town, and not the church that's standing still to this day. And so whenever we had the family reunion there at Philadelphia, the Ford family reunion for my Ford line, we always thought that he was buried out there, and the DAR has a marker out there. So this is now a quandary for me. Who is your founding father, and where is he buried? Which cemetery is he in? So that was one of the cool stories that I had from my experiences in this.
My brave partner. Braver than I am. While we were researching the Fords, she has a wonderful book about the Ford family, one of those lovely family books. It's all got the leather binding and all that. She's going to show me something in this book, and as we're paging through it, this pops up. I said, whoa, stop, what is that? We turn back to it, and it's a page from a newspaper article from 1956. It was Victor King advertising his book and using this image to advertise the fact that he was about to write his book. Thought, are those right? I went and got that picture of the Meck deck that we know is a false picture of the Meck deck, and compared those signatures to these, and they're nothing like them. I went, okay, we know those are wrong. Maybe these are right. Let me see if I can figure out where this is. If it was advertising Victor King's book, maybe he's got it in his book. That sent me all the way to India for the book, to get that, because I couldn't see it online. Got it. Took a month and a half to get it. Got it. Went through every page of it. Guess what? Not there. Not there. Not anywhere in the book. Well, okay. Maybe I've been a total dead end. Don't know. But I started cutting these all apart, and as you see in the book, you'll find that those signatures are now attached to all the people that they go with in the book. But I wanted to know who wasn't there, so I figured them all out. There's 23 signatures on that page. I must admit, this one's a little unintelligible. There was only one doctor, but I could see his signature, so I didn't know who that was. But I was down at the Charlotte Museum of History, talking once again to the old Nolan Dan, who's a wonderful young man down there, about where people were in Charlotte. And the day I walked in, he greets me with, "You can't believe what I got! Daphne Taylor showed me this book a long time ago, but she wouldn't even let it out of her hand, but I finally found a copy. Look at this." He opened the book, and guess what was in the book? Those signatures. Had I not been there on that particular day that he got the mail, I would never have known he had a book or that the signatures were in the book. So serendipity, we found the signatures and their source, and that's their source. Is that James W. Osborne collected those back in the 1830s out of public records and they were published in a book called Lawson's Pictorial History of the American Revolution in 1855. And those 23 signatures are valid signatures. Well, I had 5 more to find. So I started digging, and Tripp went down and found his McClure ancestors down in the public records, and we got them adding McClure's signature that way. I have a good friend who's a collector of signatures, and he managed to find 3 more for me. So I've only got 1 left, right? If I can figure out whose this is. And the only 2 that were left were Reverend Hezekiah Bach and Duncan Ogletree. And I decided this was a lot more likely to be Ogletree than Bach's. So that's assigned to Ogletree, and the only one missing is Reverend Bach. Reverend Bach died a year after this, in 1776. As a matter of fact, in April 1776, if I remember right. So finding his signature was very hard. That church's records were all destroyed. They were picked up in the mid-1800s. They didn't have his original signatures in the church. He didn't own land because he was living on church land, so we didn't have deeds and records for that. So if anybody has Reverend Hezekiah Block's signature, please tell me. That's the one I'm still looking for. Now we have a new feature in the book. Now we have signatures, which is kind of important if you're going to be the signer of something. These are the people who we actually talk to their descendants. And these are the things that we got from them. Sometimes they were books, sometimes they were notes they sent us, sometimes we actually got to interview them. It was very exciting to do that. My own personal story is about Graham. You can tell me whatever stories you want about your guys in a second. But mine is about J.C. Graham. J.C. Graham is, I think, past 90 now. Hearing is not his best thing. But he knows everything about his family. At least he thinks he does. He's another way, he's got a couple of messed up stories along the way. But he is a direct descendant of the signer William Graham, and a co-descendant of the signer of the General Joseph Graham, who you may know was one of the big generals. He was badly wounded during the Battle of Charlotte and pulled off the battlefield and saved by the fact of the 9 wounds that he had, and went on to be a general and became a general in the Revolution. That is a nephew of William Graham, so he's related to both those Grahams. And I got to sit in a house that was on the property owned by William Graham and talk to his direct descendant, J.C., about this for a couple of hours one day. It was so cool. And then he wanted to leave the house for a while, which he couldn't do unless somebody took him. So I got in my car and we drove over to, I never say this right, Peel, is that the right name of the church over in Lincoln County? It's spelled very strangely, P-E-H-A-L, or P-E-L-A-H, Peel, I think it's called. Old abandoned church that has a neat cemetery, and that's where the Grahams are buried. You might go see the Grahams' tombstones. So we drove over there together and walked around the whole cemetery, and got to see the tombstones he hadn't seen in several years. Just a really great day to be a part of all this. And you want to tell me stories about the guys that you talked to on Florida?
So, my first story is about one of my Alexander ancestors. Who are my Alexander cousins that are here? There you go. And it also involves another person who's here, which is a descendant of Matthew McClure. Can you stand up for us? I interviewed this wonderful gentleman. We are bound together now. One of the cool things about this process for me was to interview somebody like Tripp, who is a descendant of one of the Mecklenburg signers, and I'm a descendant of another Mecklenburg signer. My direct ancestor is Hezekiah Alexander, it's my 4th great grandfather. And so I was asked by Sarah Sue to interview Tripp, and I went over to his office, and we sat down, and we started talking about our ancestors. And the first thing that was really cool about it is to think about the fact that John McNitt Alexander and Matthew McClure were friends and colleagues and co-signers of the MACDAC 250 years ago. And here Tripp and I are sitting, all these years later, talking to each other. We're both descendants of these two. And what a really cool experience. John McNitt would be my 5th great uncle because he was the brother to Hezekiah. So then Tripp starts telling me something about my ancestor that I did not already know. And that's something some of you may be familiar with, but John McNitt Alexander was famous not only for being the secretary of the convention where they signed the MACDAC, but also in his estate, Alexandriana, he was known for making apple brandy with the water out of the spring. And so I didn't know about this part of the history, but the Matthew McClure descendant, Tripp, told me that Matthew McClure used to go over to Alexandriana. And he and John McNitt would sit around. I could just see them sitting by the fire, shooting the breeze, drinking the apple brandy and smoking cigars. I'm sure you can just, imagine this in your mind. And so I really love this story because it shows, again, how these people were real, they friends, they were comrades, they were doing this work together, and they started the revolution together. So I love that story. Another thing that really happened that helped me expand my own understanding of my ancestors, I knew a lot about Hezekiah and John McNitt. I learned more about Abraham, who was the chair of the convention on May 19th and 20th. But they were also related, of course. They were Abraham was cousins of John McNitt and Hezekiah, were brothers. And then the other three signers of the McNitt, who were Alexanders, Adam, Ezra, and Charles, were cousins as well. And so, because I also have the Ford ancestor, that makes me the descendant of 7 of them. So I can say that I'm related to 1/4 of the McNitt side. So, and this is why Sarah Sue, who's from Kansas City, asked me to co-author with her. This family background has always been family lore in both of my families on both sides. As I said, the Fords have met for nearly 100 years every year at Philadelphia Presbyterian for a family reunion. But learning about it in this way was very expansive because Ezra Alexander, for example, he ended up marrying into the Thomas Polk family. Thomas Polk, who was a signer and considered the founder of Charlotte. And a lot of those folks gravitated over to Tennessee because, of course, the president that is from here, James K. Polk, his family ended up in Tennessee. He was groomed for the presidency by Andrew Jackson, whose estate, the Hermitage, is right outside of Nashville. Well, one of my 2 sons, who is, by the way, named Charles, like Charles Alexander, I didn't know that at the time, and my other son is named John Alexander, my son, Charles, lives in Nashville, and he works in Gallatin, which is a suburb of Nashville, which is where a lot of the signers ended up who they bought land in Tennessee. They purchased property in Tennessee. And all that's connected in with all that over there as well. And I learned all of that kind of thing. New information about my family that I didn't know in this process. So it was very cool. And thank you, Tripp, for being a prop for me tonight. I appreciate it. Did he have to? Is he still out there?
He probably takes it down.
I was saying thank you, Tripp, for being a prop for me tonight. I appreciate it.
Check on the alarm.
I'm not related to any of these people. I'm just a writer. But I did get to meet some of the Reeses. One of my DAR sisters is Peggy Reese, not Reese, but Reese. And she is a neighbor of David Reese, whose father, Jim Reese, did keep track of it. That's where those Reese papers came from. But then we got a note from the Hirsch family, who was from Texas. They said, we're Reese's too. So they came from Texas. Does anybody come from farther away than Texas? Anybody else come from outside the state to be here? I think you're lying to me, Dustin. The Hirsches, please stand up. And the other people who come from farther away than just the state, please stand up. The Hirsches are from Houston, and they're Reese's. Dustin is not blood related to any of the sliders, but he is the creator of our commemorative poster for the 250th. So you need to go back and see what it is. So far, what we've got is good, wonderful David Fleming giving us a lovely forward. We have some information about why there's a document at all, who did and didn't sign it, how Alexander Craighead fits into all of this. And then we have each thing about the signers and the supporters, and that's 3 people that we thought we really should keep in there. One being William Graham, one being James Jack. How could you live without James Jack? And the person who saved Joseph Graham is Susan Alexander, Amanda Alexander. So those are the 3 supporters that we listed in there as well. And for each one of those, you get a page that looks something like that, or multiple pages. You get some sort of an image of the individual. You get what we know about them, and you get a picture of their tombstone and their signature. Now, within that writing, as best as we could find, you'll get their parents, if we can, their grandparents, their birthplace, their birth date, when they came to North Carolina or if they were born in North Carolina. Any other civic offices they filled, any church offices they filled, where they lived, where they died, where they're buried, and if there's anything interesting about their children we can find, they're in there too. So that's for each of the people we're talking about. We'll take any more information you want to give us. You want to send me something else, we'll find a place to record it and hang on to it. But having done all that, we thought, well, that's nice, but as Laura so brilliantly pointed out, they're all related to each other. And that made us very curious about what it would take to show you that. So we asked the Old Mac Genealogical Society, and one of their members would help us out. And Lauren Higgs, who's a professional genealogist, raised her hand. She may regret it by now. But she raised her hand, and she created this magnificent piece of work. Now, I know you can't see it from where you are. And in the book, it's even a little challenging. But what we have here is where there's a solid line, there's actual blood kinship. Those are the Harrises, those are the Alexanders. Where there's dotted lines, there's married kinship. Or at the very least, there's someone that served in the same unit of the militia with the other person. The color of the little circle tells you where they came from. This is the only one from Connecticut, that's Avery. A lot of them came from Pennsylvania or Maryland, that's the blue ones and the dark ones. Some of the really interesting ones are the ones that came here from Virginia because they absolutely came from Craighead. And the really fascinating ones are these three because they're first generation. They were born somewhere in Europe. So our signers included everyone from somebody who came from Europe to somebody who was born here of the second, third generation in this county. So that's a pretty wide range. And their ages range from 21 to 65. You wouldn't think it'd be quite that wide, but it is. The crosses on them say which church that they're affiliated with, of the churches that existed there, the Revolutionary churches. And once we knew how they kind of were connected, we were also curious about where they lived. Now, do you know how they were supposed to decide who was going to be the representatives there? You heard that story about getting the militia involved? I'm seeing a lot of blank faces. I'll tell you this little story quick. When it was decided to have this meeting on May 19th, Thomas Polk was commissioned to go to his militia, who's the head of the militia for the whole county, go to your militia units and get 2 people elected from every militia unit. As far as we know, there were 9. The reason I think there's 9 is, first of all, somebody said there was, a book I read, but also the Mecklenburg Declaration says we will leave our militia as it is now, and in the Mecklenburg Resolves there are 9 units. Which makes me think there were 9 before as well. So, elected 2 delegates from each militia unit. Now, you would think that this is the first appearance of Republican democracy in this country. Because anybody in that militia unit could have been elected. And that's every male in the county between the ages of 16 and 60. No matter what they own or don't own. So, it could be the lowliest private that got elected. Sadly, it wasn't. It was usually the officers and the landholders. But I was just pretty excited about the fact that the opportunity was there to do really wide public elections for the first time. So the first 18 people come as delegates from the militia. Who are the other 10? And I always say 10 because there were 28 to start with. I know you've heard the word 27, and some people say 26. And you'll see in one of the chapters how that all sorts out. But it started out at 28 because there were those 18 and 10 organizers. As far as I can tell, and this takes a little bit of imagination, but I think what happened was there were 6 people on the Committee of Safety. Those are people like Hezekiah and John McNitt Alexander, biggest names that you know were on the committee. Take those 6, add 2 very prominent citizens, being Reese and, who's the other one's over 60, do you remember? Maybe. 2 of them were past 60, so they couldn't be in the militia anyway. They were very prominent citizens. So you put them in there because they were there, if they were over 60. And then you add 2 more, which probably couldn't have been in the militia anyhow. One is a guy named Kennan, who came here from Salisbury as a part of their committee of safety to observe, we think. He's a lawyer. And the other one is this Reverend Hezekiah Bach that we keep bumping into. And as a reverend, he may or may not have ever been in the militia unit. Chances he was older, because he wasn't that old, but he might not have been in the militia anyway. So if you add those 2 people, the 2 that are over 60, and the 6 in between, you get the other 10 people that live there. That makes them 28. I'm pretty happy with that number. You can argue with me later if you'd like. But I'm pretty good with that number. So those 28 people are there. There's some other people there. We know there's other people there. There's at least 2 teenagers that we know are there. There's probably a couple of cousins because the rest of the group is there, but not those 2 are signers. Like Ezekiel Polk is one of them that probably was there that didn't sign it, just because he only got 2 out there in. So we think maybe there's as many as 30 or 35 people in the room. That's how you get that number of 28. But there's this guy named Duncan Ogletree. One of my favorite stories in the whole thing. Duncan Ogletree was the merchant. He was the guy that had a store in downtown Charlotte. And he typified the people who were not so sure about this. They got together on the 19th. They said they were going to write some sort of an appeal to the governor about all the things that were going wrong. You can read the book what some of those special things were. And that afternoon, the express writer comes rolling in, says, you should hear what happened at Concord and Lexington. They say, well, if they're shooting at us anyway, we might as well say, just go away. We're not even going to try to negotiate with you. And all of a sudden, Kennan, the lawyer from Salisbury, Ephraim Brevard, who's on the Committee of Safety, and Reverend Hezekiah Bach, representing the church, go off until 2 in the morning, and they write down the sense of the meeting, which comes out to be the 5 resolves we know as the Mecklenburg Declaration. When that was brought back to the group, the one thing that they said was, we all made an oath to the King of England when we got here. Either we came here, when we got land, when we turned 21, when we joined the militia. We've all taken an oath to the King. How can we as good Presbyterians deny our oaths? Somebody, I've never read who, put forth the argument that any oath is a contract between 2 sides, and if one side gives up on the oath, the other side is no longer bound by it. And since the King had just shot Americans, that broke the oath. That convinced almost everybody except Duncan Ogletree. Duncan Ogletree wasn't buying into this completely. He was willing to sign the document, but he wasn't willing to take the oath to the new government. Because he wasn't willing to take the oath to the new government, they fined him severely. He didn't pay it for a long time. He finally did put up the bond. And life happened for a few years until Cornwallis came on the scene in 1781, at which point the merchant, Ogletree, decided that it was more in his best interest to do business with the British than to keep the faith with the people, which he'd never taken the oath. So he started doing business with the British. When the rest of the signers signed that out, they said, well, and they literally took his name off the document. And no copy after that ever had Ogletree's name on the document, which is how we got down to 27. I love it. When Ogletree found out that he was in that much trouble, he went to John and Alexander's place out in Indiana, knocked on the door, pleaded for mercy with Mrs. John McNett, and she said, I won't even talk to you. Sent somebody to go get John out of the fields. He came over and he said, I'm not talking to you either. But if you're not out of this county by morning, you're probably dead. And he disappeared. And he went south, probably to Georgia, maybe to Florida, and nobody knows where he went, how long he lived, or where he's buried. He was already past 60 by that time. We got to the time of 1781, so he didn't live much longer. But not Ogletree is lost in history because he broke faith. those militia units, a lot of them met at the churches. You can sort of see where the churches are scattered around the county. You can see where their land is scattered around the county. So for a time when communication was as slow as it was, and these were all the roads that there were, the dotted lines of the roads, those are all the roads that you drive over there to drive on, the little roads and everything else in the cow path. They did a pretty good job about covering the whole county with their representations. So, not a bad job. Not a bad job for people that far longer. Question that people ask me most of all is, what does this mean today? To me, what it means today, I'll let you answer this one too, but to me what it means today is that 28 people, nobody particularly important, nobody outside this county of Alberta, got together and said, something's not going right. We have the right to make it go right. It's between us and our God and our conscience about how this works. We're going to fix it. If you're going to be this strict about it as that you're going to kill us, we're going to write you off, and we're going to make it right. And in a 24-hour cycle, they made that happen, which is why it's a one-day revolution. So years to build up to it, that all happened in about 24 hours. And it was the first in the country. There were probably 90 more after that before we actually get to the National Declaration. Most of those were instructions to the delegates at the National saying, we want you to vote for independence. But there were some others like this that said, we're already free. We just, come along with this. But this was the first. And according to John Adams, the most eloquent. I like that word. So I'm all about the fact that small group of people who have a reason to want to do something can get together in America, and that's the American thing. To get together and to say, this is wrong, we're going to right the wrong, and we do it. And if we have forgotten that, we've forgotten how to be Americans. Your turn.
History of being the first to declare our independence in this country is important to us today because it's something that has stood us in good stead all these years, and it's something we still have to focus on today to make sure that it continues for another 250 years. And lastly, I'm a pastor, and I preached on this in my church yesterday. What we say about Alexander Craighead was that he was the pastor preaching in the Seven Sister Churches. And probably about 3/4 of the signers of Mecklenburg were in his congregations and listening to him preach about the freedom that we are given by natural right from God. And that when people start infringing upon that, it's a matter of our conscience, our freedom of conscience, and certainly about religious liberty. We know that's a founding principle of our nation as well. And so it's still valid today, and it's still something that we have to preserve and protect and defend all of the rights and privileges that we have, and always fight for them for ourselves and for everyone else who's entitled to them.
Do we have any questions? The offers are open for some questions. Yes.
Yes, I have a question about where do we think that they signed this document? Is there a place?
Yep. There's a place. You can go down tomorrow and see where it was. It's the corner of Trade and Tryon, downtown. And those are two old Indian paths that used to cross. And they built a courthouse right in the middle of the exchange of the cross. Not on one side of the other, right in the middle, facing one of the streets. That's where the original courthouse was. It was Thomas Polk Convention. So I could get the county seat to be here. I understand that Dan Dance, one of our great artists around here, has recreated a version of that courthouse for tomorrow. So if you get to go downtown and get to see a recreation, that's where it was. That's where it was.
Who else? Yes, sir. Over there.
Yes. I'd just like to say that this is the 250th anniversary of the Met Day. It's also the 30th anniversary of this organization when we got it going together again after 20 years. It had this last big event on the bicentennial when President Ford was here. And then nothing happened for 20 years. And so in 1975, I'm a former member of the board, and I suggested we do something for May 20th. And they said, well, go do it. And so several people got together and we started reading the back deck at the square. And tomorrow at noon, there will be that reading along with the militia and the cannons and all the falderall. And then the May 20th Society came along and picked it up and gave it some oomph. But it was the MHA that started. And the second thing I'd like to say is in 1996, we started in 1995. And in 96, we republished Chain of Error. I know you mentioned Chain of Error, but the value of that book was that at the time, that was the only book available for people to get information, and it was out of print. And so the MHA reprinted it and added some information in the back and put Dr. Phillips, who was a naysayer, put his picture in the back of the book. And the Chain of Error book was the only thing we had to argue against Dan Morrill and all the naysayers at the Charlotte Observer who were poo-pooing the whole thing. So we were trying to fan the flames. And the value of that book, it's very academic, it's sort of boring. David Fleming's book is much more readable, but this book has all the real facts, and it has the facsimiles of the original copies that are in the Southern Historical Collection in Chapel Hill. There were 2 copies or 3 copies that were made. The Minute Book burned in 1800, but the copies were circulated before then. One of them went to William Richardson Davey, who was a congressman at the time, and he had it circulated around, and it ended up back in Chapel Hill, and those copies are in the Chain of Error book. MHA had the book republished, and of course, I think we still have plenty of copies left because it was not that exciting at the time, but I see we do have copies in the back. I don't know how many they reprinted. But
Good. And speaking of books, and speaking of the 7 churches,
We have another one of those coming up next
okay, we can tip the hand here. Stay tuned, because the follow-up volume is going to be about the 7 churches in Mecklenburg County. So be on the lookout, and hopefully in the fall we'll have a program around that.